So, what makes a compelling and memorable movie hero or protagonist? Not that hero and protagonist are necessarily synonymous. I mean, sometimes. The protagonist can of course be a hero or anti-hero. A hero is someone who is courageous, or who becomes courageous, to overcome an obstacle or defeat an adversary. An anti-hero must also follow the same path as a hero. They must overcome something. They must survive obstacles, and like the hero, attain victory or defeat. But they're not heroic. They don't have the same moral qualities as a hero. An anti-hero may be villainous, but they're not the antagonist. A typical hero might be Indiana Jones. He's witty, he's charming, he's good-looking, and he's courageous. An anti-hero might be Tony Montana, Scarface, a ruthless gangster who isn't so much likeable as he is fascinating to watch. What makes them the protagonist is that whether the narrative is restricted to them or not, they're the main character, the person we mostly follow. Heroes and anti-heroes can be likeable and dislikable. Some anti-heroes are still people we as an audience might like. Sylvester Stallone in the first Rambo film is an anti-hero. He ends up fighting local authorities who think he's a drifter. He's motivated by a feeling of hatred for abusive authority, and by the feeling that he, as a Vietnam vet, has been forgotten. He's not entirely to blame for how the situation in the movie pans out, but he is on the wrong side of the law. He's not motivated to stop injustice, but deliver some form of payback. He's not so much courageous as dangerous and efficient. Yet he's still a sympathetic character. He isn't malicious. Rambo is an anti-hero, but he's completely unlike another anti-hero, such as Scarface. Scarface is of course rotten through and through, and you can dislike him for both his actions as well as his general disposition. Heroes are more likely to be likeable. If they're not likeable, they're probably an anti-hero. Although not always.
Have you read my book on the grieving process? It's called What's This? I did one of these.
We have a lot of anti-heroes in films, TV and literature, and often that's because anti-heroes offer a deeper character. Real people are flawed, and I think it can be hard to relate to a perfect hero. That's maybe why the Christopher Reeve starring Superman films worked. Superman's alter ego, Clark Kent, was so mild-mannered when Reeve played him, and so often overlooked, it was something most people could relate to, or at least find funny. The anti-hero in 1991's Falling Down, played by Michael Douglas, is an apparent good man turned bad. The film is essentially about one man's destructive breakdown, and the film makes clear that Douglas's character, William Foster, is not a good guy. But in his reaction to everyday annoyances, with over-the-top anger and violence, there is something to relate to. No one likes to be overcharged.
Donuts. Package of 6, how much?
$1.12.
Oh! Too much.
Lots of people dream of teaching some gangbangers a lesson.
Take some shooting lessons, asshole.
He may not always be likeable, but as a protagonist, he is compelling because he is a normal man, set loose. He's engaging to us as an audience because most people can relate to being stuck in a never-ending traffic jam and wanting to go mad. And he's memorable because he does. Heroes, like anti-heroes, are often flawed, but sometimes it's their relatability, their normality, which can help people connect with them, and which can help the character resonate. Indiana Jones does some extraordinary things. Well, let's not talk about that one. But despite stopping the Nazis obtaining the Ark of the Covenant, he's a pretty normal guy, even if he is an exaggerated character. Of course, sometimes characters intrigue us because they're not relatable, because they're extraordinary. Superheroes have huge fan bases for many reasons, but surely a lot of their appeal is down to their incredible powers, and the ideas that we as an audience can come up with as to how they, or we ourselves, might use their powers. Superman can do almost anything. and he, like other superheroes, can create memorable moments by solving problems creatively. But also superheroes and other incredible or fantastic protagonists can also be memorable because of how formidable they are, how much they do achieve, or for anti-heroes, how renegade their actions can be. Robocop looks striking, is remorseless in his pursuit of the law, but is bound by the book no matter how inappropriate.
Madam, you have suffered an emotional shock. I will notify a rape crisis center.
He as a character is memorable for a lot of the humour in the film, and the film's brutality too, but also for the same reason as Batman or someone like the Man with No Name. He's bold and tough and very able. He's badass. James Bond defeats baddies and seduces a lady or two, and does it all fueled by vodka and I guess an occasional olive. James Bond is perhaps more memorable for the situations he finds himself in, for the way he handles those situations coolly, for walking across crocodiles' heads. He doesn't have to be someone we relate to. The appeal of the character is in his efficiency at what he does, and the bizarre and tense situations he gets into and out of. Indiana Jones, James Bond, or Lara Croft aren't people you would necessarily want to watch on their days off. Their situation makes them. What they have to overcome, the villain they must defeat, helps define them. That's not necessarily to say these characters are without depth. John McClane in Die Hard with a Vengeance is washed up, he's hungover, and it's pretty funny, it's part of his character. But it's not the reason to watch Bruce Willis in this movie.
Are you aiming for these people? No. Maybe they're mine.
Most film protagonists that permeate themselves onto our consciousness do so because of who they are and what they do, and these two are of course connected. What characters do usually informs their development. Luke Skywalker is a good example of this. He follows, through both the original Star Wars trilogy and just in the first film too, development typical of what in literary fiction would be called Bildungsroman, a genre where character growth is the focus, usually following a character from youth to adulthood. Luke is pretty naive at the beginning of the first Star Wars film. By the end, he may not be a master of the Force, but he has grown considerably. By the end of the trilogy, he is still growing, but has become a Jedi. He has overcome fears and numerous obstacles. So while Star Wars has many aspects of a coming-of-age film, I feel that both Luke and Han Solo have characters that are memorable because of the combination of their personalities and their actions. Perhaps, however, the characters who are most memorable aren't the ones we can necessarily relate to, nor the ones who necessarily do things that are memorable or exciting, but the ones who are written and performed with insight and depth. Jack Nicholson's titular character in About Schmidt does not do anything special. He mourns the loss of a loved one and goes to his daughter's wedding. He is relatable, but the reason Schmidt as a protagonist resonates is because he is morally and emotionally complex. He endures and suffers hardships that are both out of his control and of his making. Elizabeth Taylor as Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf presents both a horrible and sympathetic character, one half of a caustic and dysfunctional marriage.
What a dump!
Daniel Plainview in There Will Be Blood, played by Daniel Day-Lewis, is a deeply flawed and increasingly disgusting character, haunted, emotionally isolated, and adrift.
I drink it up!
Now Schmidt and Martha and Daniel Plainview may not always be likeable. Often they're not likeable at all. They may not always seem to be relatable, but they are close to reality. And the reason they're close to reality is because of the way they're written and the way they're performed. The quite probably insane and certainly murderous Henry, in Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, is not a likeable character. But he is portrayed as human, and because of that, Michael Rooker's performance is fascinating. A lot of this does of course come down to taste and personal preference, but Travis Bickle is someone I really don't have much in common with. I don't relate to a great deal. I mean, apart from the psychosis and the troubled memories of Nam. Worst bicycle tour ever. Ho Chi Minh City to Indianapolis. However, Bickle, like many other protagonists, is very well drawn, very well performed, and taps into something. Characters like these are a window into a soul, even if it is a fictional soul. And for me, that's what makes a character interesting. Of course, having said that, there are many great characters which aren't necessarily the deepest ever written, which stand out because they're so unique, and because they immediately capture an idea. You can look at Robocop, you can listen to him for 5 seconds, and you know what he is.
Your move, creep.
Well, those are my thoughts on what makes a protagonist compelling. Lots of different factors, depending on the protagonist in question. I'm going to spend this last segment of the video talking about a podcast I'm going to be doing in a couple of weeks. So if you want to hear about that, keep watching, and if you don't, thanks very much for watching. See you next time. So, on the 22nd of September, I'm launching a film-related podcast imaginatively titled The George Rockall-Schmidt Show. Every Friday, myself and the co-host, Damien, will be looking at famous films or franchises, presenting what-ifs or fixes, and giving alternatives, perhaps viable, perhaps not. The first episode will be us talking about The Phantom Menace and what could have been. In the second episode, we'll discuss other movies Hans Gruber could have been in if he hadn't left Die Hard in such a non-returnable way. And then in the third episode, we'll be looking at what might happen in Rocky VIII. It's going to be a light-hearted podcast, I think around about the 30-minute mark. I want to keep it concise because I'm not trying to present filler here. I don't want to give you B material. I want to make it as enjoyable and as joke-filled as possible. So, I hope to see you there. And I hope to see you next time where I'll be discussing it and the marketing surrounding it. See you then.
My mistake. Work often.